news now from the Supreme Court of the United States.
Let's get right to NBC's Pete Williams, who has just reported that the court has struck down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. Pete, what can you tell us?
The Supreme Court has just struck down the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. This was the law passed by Congress in 1996, signed by President Clinton, that prevented the federal government from recognizing the validity of same-sex marriages in the states where they're legal. It's a 5-4 decision written by Justice Anthony Kennedy. And the interesting thing here is that the court has said that DOMA is unconstitutional as a matter of equal protection, meaning that it's discriminatory. Now, the importance of that is, if the Supreme Court had struck it down on a narrower basis by saying, for example, that the federal government doesn't have the power to determine what a marriage is, that's a matter for the states, that would have been a very narrow ruling. This is a very broad ruling. If the Supreme Court here is saying that the federal government can't make distinctions between same-sex and opposite-sex couples in terms of what marriages the federal government will recognize, then this is an opinion that can be used by proponents of same-sex marriage to attack laws in other states. So it's a significant ruling from the Supreme Court. We're still waiting for the decision on California's Proposition 8. But I would say, based on the size of this ruling and the size of the dissent, that it's going to take the justices a long time to read their opinions from the bench.
Right.
I would guess that the dissenters will read their dissents as well. So we've got some period of time to wait here before we get the other decision. But
Pete, I just want to mention, obviously, we're hearing reaction. We're now seeing reaction in Washington and elsewhere. I know at the court people had camped out overnight trying to get a seat to go in and witness this historic ruling coming down. I want to just ask you this. Immediate impact right now on the federal government, on the 12 states in the District of Columbia that recognize same-sex marriage, and on the states that do not. What is the immediate impact?
Well, the immediate impact is now the federal government's going to have to rework all of its regulations. First of all, the woman who brought this case no longer owes the IRS $300,000. This was a challenge brought by a woman in New York named Edie Windsor. Her same-sex partner died and left her the estate. The IRS said, well, we can't recognize your marriage, so you owe us $300,000. That's how this case got to the Supreme Court. So it's a direct win for her. But in terms of the federal government now, they're going to have to rework all their regulations. What this means is that now if a couple gets married in, say, Massachusetts, where same-sex marriage is legal, or any of the other 12 states, or here in the District of Columbia, those marriages were already recognized by the state, but not the federal government. So, for example, we know of cases where a gay service member would deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan, get killed on active duty. Their survivor would not be entitled to federal survivor benefits. The military wouldn't even tell them that their spouse had died because they didn't consider them next of kin. Social Security benefits, tax recognition by the IRS, veterans benefits, all of those panoply of federal benefits were not available to legally married same-sex couples. Now they are. So it's going to take the federal government a little while to rework its regulations and make all those things a reality. But but beyond this, the practical recognition, it's the force of this opinion. I see out of the corner of my eye Ted Boutros here, who is representing the couples in California. We're waiting for the Prop 8 decision. Ted, come right on up here if you don't mind. I'm just curious to ask you, that now that the Supreme Court has struck down the Defense of Marriage Act, what do you think, and saying so on equal protection grounds, what's the importance of that for now other marriage cases? Look right at that.
Well, I think the fact that the court said that DOMA singled out a class of people for dissimilar treatment and unequal treatment suggests Proposition 8 should fall on the same ground, on equal protection grounds. That's what the Ninth Circuit held. We're hopeful that's what the court's going to do this morning. And I think the language that I've seen from the opinion is very strong on the equal protection issue. So we're very hopeful.
Right. Just quickly, before I go back to Matt and Savannah, the Supreme Court plainly says they're not proclaiming a federal or a national right to same-sex marriage. This decision by itself doesn't say to the other states, you have to allow same-sex marriages. But it's language that can be used by opponents to attack those laws. Matt, Savannah?